Okay, good morning, everyone. Really pleased to see so many people joining us right on the dot of 10 o'clock here this morning. So thank you very much for joining us today in our webinar number 5 in our webinar series. Today's webinar is on multi-layered protection for your Office 365, or what Microsoft is recently relabeling as the Microsoft 365 suite. And to help us walk through that multi-layered protection and what you need to be not just concerned about, but on top of for Microsoft 365 is Thomas Ferguson, a senior engineer in Barracuda Networks, who is, I guess, in a position where he's at home permanently, based out of Melbourne today. So I'll be joining Thomas here in facilitating. However, Thomas will take the lead on today's session. Before we get started though, what I would like to do is just let everybody know that we have a chat tab open. If you have any questions during the session from Thomas today, please do pump through the questions as well. If you have technical difficulties, please do pump them through as well. And we've got Andrew sitting in the background here who'll help us through any of those difficulties. We do have dedicated Q&A on offer at the end. However, I've had a quick conversation with Thomas, and as per our normal preference, please ask the questions as they're pertinent on the way through, and we'll do our best on the way through to answer them time and place. Without any further ado, what I'd like to do is just introduce Thomas and allow Thomas to introduce himself and then take control of the presentation. Good morning, Thomas.
Good morning, thanks, Dean. I'm just going to share my my screen over. Just let me know if you are getting that through okay.
I've got it loud and clear there, and I can see it very, very clear. Thanks, Thomas. Perfect. I'm just going to take my video off, so over to you.
No worries. All right, thanks for the introduction as well, Dean. Thanks for the opportunity to join everyone today and have a chat about some of this stuff. I've got a fair bit I want to go through today, so I'll try not to go too far into each topic so we don't get too lost in the mud. But I'm going to start off firstly just talking a little bit about Barracuda, you know, who we are and where we've come from, in case there's anyone on the call who's sort of not aware of our origins. Then discuss what we've been seeing in terms of threats over sort of the past few months, along with discussion on how we can protect ourselves from some of these. And then also follow on to that, just discuss a bit about social media, the origin of some of the attacks, and the real importance of user education today. So starting off, who is Barracuda? So I mean, as a company, we started some 20 odd years ago as an internet service provider, offering internet connections to our clients. All of those internet connections came with a free email address, and what ended up happening is all of our customers were getting heaps of spam to those email addresses. We developed out one of the first email security gateways in the world, and then from that point shifted over to becoming a security company and dropped the ISP sense of that. So then from there created sort of a whole, you know, a raft of other solutions around security, include firewalls, web content filters, email protection systems, application delivery, load balancing, just to name a few, which are generally all focused around security. And this covers off a lot more than just email and 365, and the larger product set that we have does, you know, include a number of other key products like web application firewalls, where we're leaders in the IT security landscape. Now today we provide those IT security and data protection solutions to around 150,000 customers worldwide. These range from, you know, very small, you know, 10-seat organizations to very large, you know, 15, 20, sort of 50,000 seat organizations, spanning all of the major industry sectors. We're headquartered out of Silicon Valley, but we are a global company with local offices and partners all down, you know, the East Coast here in Australia and over in New Zealand as well. We've got pretty heavy investment in security, including integration with the major public cloud platforms and providers, which includes our email security products, with full support in those environments. And most of our products can be deployed as either, you know, an on-premise sort of old-style physical appliance, a virtual appliance in AWS, Microsoft Azure, 365, obviously, as we'll talk about today, and then more recently Google Cloud platform as well, or they just pretty much get offers as a SaaS service from us. So now, talking about the new world, it's hard to avoid putting COVID in presentations these days, since it's, especially in Melbourne anyway, so in your face. And the shift to remote working, albeit remote learning, if you're students, has seen unbelievable uptake of SaaS and productivity services like Office 365, or as Dean mentioned, now Microsoft 365. And my daughter's school, for example, has got a couple thousand students, and they've all moved in a matter of weeks over to using MS Teams, lesson plans via emails, and the like. And we're seeing, security and data protection impacted because of that really rapid shift, requiring a lot of organisations to rethink how you secure your users, how you secure that data, and protect it while you're utilising, some of these cloud services in such a dispersed fashion. Now, Microsoft even had to, throttle back access to those services because of that massive surge in demand. And not surprisingly, we've also seen a massive increase in malicious cyber activity related to that same change. And, while there have been attacks, using COVID as such as a theme, such as payment scams related to JobKeeper and such, we at Barracuda have also seen a huge increase in the number of attacks designed to exploit people and students just because they're working from home. Now, it does remain that email is still a really popular attack vector, if not one of the most commonly attacked vectors. And if we consider the use of email in business today, it's probably by far the most common communication medium used by many businesses. And if we were to actually remove it, the way many of us do business today would completely change, and to some probably completely stop their business, almost sort of making an existential threat. And to illustrate that, I've got some of the stats from the most recent Verizon data breach investigation report. What's on here, social engineering representing 98% of incidents, and email being the most common vector. Now, one of the reasons I do like using this report in these presentations is the wide range of samples it comes from. This company's under 100 seats, over 10,000 seats in here, across many different industries. And this report covers, I think it's some 30,000 incidents, with 4,000 of those just being in APAC, which included 600 successful breaches inside APAC as well. Now, of these, the key motivator for the incidents was obviously, as you'd expect, financial gain, was somewhere around 50%, I think it was 52% of these incidents were able to recover the funds that were stolen. Now, the 48 lost all their money. And furthermore, most of those breaches where that money was lost did actually start out with a phishing attack. So why is that? You really would be hard pressed to find a company who doesn't use email, which is why it's still such a successful, attack vector for cyber criminals. Now, because of that prevalence of email and having such a wide attack surface, we are seeing a lot of work being put into the attacks which have been delivered via email. So I wanted to start with having a look at and dissecting this particular example. So this is a service impersonation that has been done really, really well. The creators actually put a lot of work in this. If you take a look at it, the branding here is looks good. It's really well aligned. The logos look really good. It's nicely proportioned, not distorted. And unlike a lot of the other phishing emails I see, this isn't just like a single image or picture. Instead, it's actually a well-constructed HTML written email, so that it scales nicely when the window is resized. When the source is placed into HTML validators, it checks out, it resizes on mobile phones. It's pretty impressive. We do still, however, have a few of our usual indicators in this email, such as things like grammar being slightly out of whack, or spaces and capitalization where it doesn't actually belong. And the usual, sender email address poorly hidden through the manipulation of email headers in here. Now, based on other Qantas emails I've seen before, I'd say they've probably used the bones of a legitimate marketing email from Qantas as the template to then redesign and do this. Now, the URL, this logon button inside this email, wasn't actually active when this email was first distributed. And this is a tactic that's commonly used to try and get around a lot of defense mechanisms. So that when it comes through, they scan it, there's no way to check what's behind that URL. Therefore, it's deemed as not malicious at the time of scanning. This is obviously as well using the COVID theme, the current climate that we've got is unfortunately showing us that people are too willing to be, I suppose, exploiting people's heightened anxieties and things like that around COVID. And as I've said in a lot of other conversations and webinars recently, hackers really don't care if you get hurt by their actions. And in a lot of instances, they're actually counting on it. Now, this attack did contain a logon button, which directs to an unusual looking URL, which obviously is not actually related to Qantas. Now, clicking on this URL quickly redirects to the actual service impersonation page. Again, this is another technique which is used to try and bypass a lot of the common threat detection mechanisms we use these days. And as mentioned before, often that URL redirect will actually remain dormant and not actually activated until the very last minute to prevent it being added to any threat classification databases and marking the domain itself as being malicious. The service impersonation page is also, again, very well written HTML. You've got the ability to correctly scale down, rearrange itself for proper viewing on a mobile phone. And just like our phishing email before, this page is also really well aligned from a branding perspective, generally from a grammar perspective and that sort of thing as well. There are a few slight inconsistencies with the actual frequent flyer logon page here, but to most, looks very good. And then same sort of thing. Now, this would obviously look familiar to many of you. This is NAB Internet Banking sign-in page. We've got things like this, an on-premise Exchange webmail login page, and more frequently, ones looking like this. These are all recent hoax replicas, and they're all a really good example of some of the, the complexity of the threats that we actually face these days. I take this last one on the screen, this Office 365 login page. So this is going to be an attempt at credential stealing. And this would likely follow on with an account takeover, where they further manipulate that account, be it, lateral phishing inside that organization, using it to fish out to other organizations, or even looking to manipulate and do a business email compromise, maybe change payment details inside invoices or something like that. And relevant, I suppose, to the COVID and remote working times, a lot of people are getting used to logging into pages that look like this a lot more often. And they're becoming far more complacent with not looking for the small details. You really need to consider how many of your staff, more even your students, if you're an educational organisation, might actually fall for this. Because that's often the real problem, is the people interacting with these pages are just not aware of what's going on. Now, if we consider email attack evolution over time, if we look back to the early days, it now seems to have been quite simple to block, a lot of the spam that we were seeing back then, be it your bulk delivered, Viagra's or Rolex watch style spam, or just your pornography, your viruses, your malware. A lot of those things in the early days had really common or easy to spot markers that we could use to block them. But obviously that's evolved over time. The malicious actors that do this sort of stuff have also evolved with that. And they're getting to the point now where some of the attacks they're crafting are extremely complex and becoming very, very difficult for a lot of email security providers to actually stop. So service impersonation is probably one of the more common ones of these that we're seeing a lot, particularly with Office 365. Now, the way they get, yeah.
Can I just interrupt you there, mate? Just back on the last slide, can you just help explain for some of us out there, what is lateral phishing?
So lateral phishing usually occurs when an account takeover occurs. So if someone loses their password, they surrender it to a malicious actor. That malicious actor is going to log into that organization's account, and they're going to sit inside their mailbox. Typically, they'll hide this by putting a bunch of mail rules in there so that incoming and outgoing emails get deleted, so the person who owns that mailbox doesn't see it occurring. Once they're in that mailbox, perhaps if they're in, they've taken over a mailbox of someone in finance, they'll then, fish inside that same organization to someone in HR. And because it's coming from an internal valid mailbox, the person receiving that fish laterally in their organization has very little indicators or clues or reason to believe that that's not a valid email from that person. That's lateral phishing, going sideways inside an organization once you've managed to take control of an account.
Got it. Thank you.
No worries. And now with the service impersonation stuff we see getting sent out, they're really good at hiding it. They'll set up new valid domains on the internet that aren't on any negative reputation lists that are going to get blocked by web filters and that sort of stuff. They do often have markers inside them still that we can pick up on in terms of the wrong page from an Office 365 perspective, or grammar and things like that. But all the traditional markers that we used to pick up on, malicious payloads, keywords, stuff like that, are all gone. And that's how they're getting through a lot of the traditional style email defense systems these days. And then again, most of those service impersonations, we'll see again going to this sort of page, as we saw before, to try and steal credentials and take over the account, in which, yes, as we just sort of talked about, that's when lateral phishing would actually occur once they've got in there and taken control of that account. Now, in terms of service impersonation locally, a lot of our discussions today are around 365, and they are the biggest SaaS email provider in the world. And if we take a look at the most impersonated brands we actually see used locally in phishing attacks, it's really no surprise that Microsoft is one of the most impersonated brands. Obviously, along with the likes of Ozpost, NAB, Westpac, ATO, both big supermarkets. Apple still features in there. But government departments as well. I thought when I looked up a lot of these stats and stuff, that it was really interesting to see the NDIS in there. Looking at the way that these people are, I suppose, preying on some more vulnerable people in our communities. But yeah, obviously in Australia, Microsoft still generally tops that list. Now, the way these threats are being delivered are exploiting, unfortunately, some of the basic pitfalls of the email protocol, such as the manipulation of email headers to pretend to be someone else. So they'll effectively use the email itself, let's say, from back in the early days. It was never built and designed to be secure. It was never built with the thought of it being used maliciously, and it's still the same protocol these days. So it requires a lot wrapped around it to make it even slightly secure. Now, these emails always include some sort of call to action or trigger, a reason for someone to want to respond to them. And they'll usually try and reference some sort of authority, be it Microsoft themselves, be it HR or a CIO or someone like that, to try and gain credibility and make an employee want to act on this sort of email. And then, yeah, just another example of probably one of the most common things that I've been talking about today, something from Microsoft or Office 365, pretending to be them, getting you to validate your account or reset a password or confirm that you don't want your account disabled, that sort of stuff. And a lot of people are falling victim to these, unfortunately. So now moving on a bit to what we can actually do to defend ourselves from some of these new threats, now that we've got many of our staff or perhaps our students using Office 365 every day. And, obviously, as I've talked about, times have changed, work habits have changed. But a key thing to understand is that all the traditional threats are still there, both from a phishing perspective, but an old school volumetric spam perspective. So the Viagra's and, Rolex watch style stuff, as I mentioned before. And because of that broad range of threats that we have to deal with, we do need a layered approach to security to deal with all of it. And there's typically, from an email perspective, two ways to do that defense. Now, first is an email gateway, which is a perimeter defense. It sits on the edge, and that's where you're going to capture a lot of that volumetric stuff, or the more traditional stuff with markers and payloads inside it. But the problem is, I suppose, to make things a little bit worse, when we talk about things like lateral phishing, as we talked about before, those internal emails don't actually cross a gateway service. So a gateway solution can't actually see the emails, much less realize they're illegitimate. And this is where we add on another layer called our API-based inbox defense. So what is that? Well, consider that everyone using email is very unique. They do this, they do that, they email this person, they get emails from that person, perhaps at this time of day, using this sort of sentiment, this sort of tone in their emails. Every person that uses email does it in their own unique way. So what if we could capture all that, build a map or a graph of that behavior and use it as a reference point, unique to each person and unique to each company? Well, we can do that. So we've got a system where we can use machine learning and a sort of an AI approach, or an artificial intelligence approach to that, to look at those behaviors. And once we understand each person's unique behavior when they're using email, we can start to pick out the inconsistencies, the non-typical behaviors, the changes in email addresses, the changes in email tone, unusual requests inside those emails. Perhaps they're making threatening requests. Perhaps they're asking for payment via cryptocurrency. And we can do this by looking at the actual way those emails are written, despite the fact that they may not have any traditional, I suppose, email markers. And we're doing this now with our Sentinel product I'll talk about in a minute, but we're also now considering how that same approach can be used in other ways, such as detecting threatening language in emails, which could be indicators of perhaps bullying in an email inside a school as well. We'll also mention our product Sentinel. So this is what's actually built to do a lot of this stuff. Now, often these phishing and these engineered emails are talked about, they do contain no threats from a traditional or a gateway detection sort of sense. There's no viruses or malware in these emails. They're sent from new domains with no negative reputation on the internet, or legitimate domains that have been hijacked, and there's really conforming to all the standards. So there's no reason for a gateway service to block a lot of those emails. And that's where we need this artificial intelligence approach and this learning approach to not only detect those slight changes in internet domains and things like that, but the user's grammar, their behaviors, their trends changing inside there as well. And that's what the Sentinel product was built specifically to do, to pick up all the changes in these trends inside there, coming in the new threats we're seeing these days. So this service trained on 4 million odd mailboxes. Being a learning-based service, it does get very accurate, very good over time at detecting all these new types of threats, be it your service impersonations, your fraud, that sort of stuff. And the good thing about it is because it's API'd inside into 365, it effectively sits in your mailbox. So we see stuff that's not only coming through the gateway at the perimeter, but we can also see inside the mailboxes. So lateral phishing or things going from mailbox to mailbox. We see everything in every person's mailbox with this service. Now, email protection, obviously, it's not just about the security component. There's a broad range of threats we have to deal with. And as I talked about, we do need a layered approach, particularly with email. And we obviously at Barracuda over the years have become well aware of this, and also some of the other gotchas within the 365 world, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But obviously the current threat landscape. And we do offer a complete email protection stack to help defend against some of the various problems, which does include some unique tools for dealing with problems after the fact, remediation tools if need be. So what does that look like? Well, at the what we call our first layer, or as I mentioned earlier, what we refer to as the gateway layer, you need to make sure you've got inbound and outbound security deployed here on the perimeter. Now, that's going to include your traditional signature defenses alongside some of your more advanced techniques like sandboxing, which helps capture zero-day threats that come through, or brand new, malicious attachments. You also need to make sure you've got systems in there that help to secure against, be it either accidental or malicious data loss, alongside encryption as well, data loss protection scanning on outbound emails as well. And the last one is really important, which is archiving for emails as well, particularly where you have compliance requirements or you do need to consider e-discovery in the future if need be. And again, with the current working from home world, particularly with COVID, it is really important with archiving to make sure you do have discovery abilities across all of your data. Now, on top of that's what we call our resiliency layer. So there's backup systems in there, which again, be it accidental or malicious, loss of data or deletion of data, we can recover from that, along with continuity services, so that email, if you have to send that during an outage, you've got a means to do that. And then next, our fraud protection layer. Now, this is where you aim to stop the attacks that bypass that gateway using that API inbox defense I just talked about, predicting how likely the email is actually to be or not to be from the person that it actually purports to be from, using those individual identity graphs and learnings that we've actually built. As well in there, the DMARC standard, that's really useful to make sure malicious actors aren't sending spam using your own brand names, your own domain names, and impersonating and pretending to be you, basically. And then finally, in their last line of defense is education and testing of our staff, which does help us to identify those at risk and help turn them to more of an asset instead of a liability. So data protection and discovery. So I wanted to bring to light a few things in here around some people who may have made the shift to 365 very rapidly without being aware of some of the pitfalls of the service in terms of protection and discovery of data in 365 particularly. Now, people do often talk about things like archive like it's a backup service, but backup and archive is very different. It does serve a very different purpose. Backups and archives, yeah, they do store copies of data from the production environment, but the use cases for each are actually very different, and it does mean that different solutions really are appropriate for each. So backup enables that recovery, obviously from a situation where data has been lost, corrupted, inaccessible, whatever. So it's primarily there to facilitate data recovery. Archives, however, are there for us to find data when we really need it, regardless of what our staff or perhaps our students have done with it after they received it. So archive enables that compliance with, whatever your industry's retention policies are, as well as supporting e-discovery inside that data. So that archive is going to preserve a single immutable copy, storage copy for a finite time period, and provide end user or be it admin access to that historical information. Now, similar to backups with archive, both should be kept in a completely separate location or platform where it can't be impacted by problems with anything with your primary production services. Now, many on here, you probably will all be aware of
Thomas?
Yeah.
Sorry, mate. With the backup and archive, do you have the ability to keep any backups and archives stored in country for data sovereignty?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, all of the services we offer in terms of backup and archive outside of 365, they all are onshore. So they all run out of Sydney. So in terms of data sovereignty, no dramas with either of those. And that's the same with our email filtering services as well, I might add, that we don't need to send those emails out of country in order to filter them.
All right, cool. And we've also just had a question come through around a statement that a lot of security vendors say they can protect against a threat, but what if one gets through the defenses through a phishing attack? How can Barracuda help respond and remediate, assuming that someone's actually fallen victim to a phishing attack, which is quite common?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's two ways that we'd approach it. One of them is with a tool we have called Forensics and Incident Response, which is designed to remediate exactly that. If things get through, we can investigate, we can find those emails, we can delete them out of the environment. We can see if the users have clicked on links inside them. We have another tool as part of the suite which helps you actually do that, exactly that. I don't have much about it in that particularly in today's presentation, but what I do have about is the second way to deal with that, which is user education and training staff to know what to do and how to react if they do get that sort of stuff. So I'll talk about that in just a little bit.
Awesome, thanks, mate. Cheers.
In terms of data retention within 365, it does use some interesting or confusing and overlapping processes and systems to secure against some modification or deletion that you do need to be aware of. So if you are actually now operating in these environments, you know where your limitation is in terms of retention. Now, I wanted to talk about the archiving process first. It's particularly unusual. So Microsoft does offer what I'll say, quote unquote, unlimited archiving in most of their 365 plans. But these auto-expanding unlimited archives they use have some really interesting shortfalls. So as archive space is needed in their archives, it actually expands and adds it on inside 10 gigabyte chunks. And those chunks of data are stored disparately in a separate storage system to your primary base archive in 365. Now, when it does this, it actually causes some really unusual problems. So yeah, you can actually go into your archive attached to your mailbox and get into the folders where this extra storage gets tacked on each time. Great. But the problem is the only way to search inside those is each time an archive storage gets expanded, it creates a new folder in your archive with the date that storage was added. And the only way to search is to go and find that particular folder and search inside there. So if you are using unlimited archives, you probably aren't actually getting accurate search results, which for a compliance or an e-discovery purpose is pretty much doesn't fit the bill. There's also some more interesting things. So things like the read, unread counts, the little blue number inside Outlook is completely inaccurate for online archives. Doesn't work. And even more so inside the auto-expanded or the extra chunks of storage that get put on there. Now you can delete items in a subfolder that points to one of those auto-expanded storage areas, but the folder itself can't be deleted. which is unusual. And even the fact that you can delete emails says that you may not have a complete and accurate copy of data in those archives from a compliance perspective, unless you've also got in place hold or litigation holds enabled tenant-wide, meaning you need to be in the higher or more expensive 365 plans to do that. Now, you can't also use the recover deleted items feature to recover items that were deleted from auto-expanded storage areas. So again, incomplete data. If you disable any of those in-place archives or mailboxes, it's hard deleted pretty much for good after the default retention period in Exchange expires. So it does get quite complex managing these archives if you're not aware of some of the shortfalls. And you don't need to take my word for it either. So the URL on the bottom of the screen there, Microsoft actually lists all of these on their own documentation, clearly stating that, it's only so far that they can go to offer these services in such a hyperscale or a massive environment that they do operate. And it's why Microsoft do work with and recommend services like Barracuda's cloud archiving service to provide a separate, true, immutable copy of your data for discovery purposes. And the same thing exists with backups. Surely Microsoft's got it covered, and the real answer is no. They do not back up or provide a backup recovery service. And it's common that people assume a SaaS platform like 365's got this all done for you. But most of the time, it's not the case. So yeah, they've got various things in there for redundancies. So I'll have it in different servers. So if a server goes offline, your service doesn't go offline, your data doesn't disappear. But they do have retention periods inside their products. And Microsoft clearly states in their documentation they do not provide point-in-time restoration of items for Exchange Online, so your emails and 365. So if you look at what is actually provided in there when you start using the service, there's a default maximum retention period for data on different products in different different ways. So Exchange Online by default allows you to undelete emails for 14 days. You do have to extend that out if you want it to 30 days. OneDrive has a recycle bin where items can be recovered up to 93 days. SharePoint Online is the same as OneDrive with a recycle bin for 93 days. However, there's also an additional 14-day window on top of that for manual recovery. But in that limited window, Microsoft will only restore complete sites, meaning that any data added after that backup will be completely overwritten. There's also some more catches in this, though, that if you read through their documentation for the service, it states that inside that 93 days, if the recycle bin reaches its size quota or it's full, the service automatically starts deleting the oldest item in there after just 3 days. Or if an administrator empties the SharePoint or the OneDrive recycle bins, you've got no recovery options. Your data is immediately purged. So it really is important to ensure you've got services like Barracuda's cloud-to-cloud backup protecting your Office 365 data.
And with that cloud-to-cloud backup, you're backing up not just the email folders, you're backing up OneDrive and SharePoint Online as well, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. We're doing all of those and the data associated in Teams as well. So if you've got staff saving documents into a Teams team through Teams, we'll capture that information as well inside the product. So it's not just one. And it does go down to things like even the versions of the files inside OneDrive. We back up the different versions and let you restore the different versions as well. So it's across that major sort of core product set inside there.
Got it.
Cool. We're now on to our sort of last topic that I wanted to go across today. And as I mentioned before about what to do if threats do actually get through. So the human firewall, the top of that email protection or that layered protection stack I talked about. Now, Gartner's recently released this quote. Gartner's an IT industry analyst body, if you're not aware, saying people influence security more than technology or policy. And that is largely because in most cases, it's the action of a person in these scenarios, which are the trigger to a successful incident or a breach. And it's a large part of the reason these attacks are so successful. It's because people are allowing them to occur. And to add to that problem is what I generally refer to as the hole in the fence. So yeah, you can drop great products like Barracuda's email security service or Sentinel, which does stop these threats, but there's also, unfortunately, other ways for these to get into our networks. So be it things like staff tethering, to their personal phones inside a corporate environment, or even accessing their personal email accounts from the work computers, or perhaps they bring in devices they've had at home that are infected. Even things like USB storage keys and hard drives that have malicious content on them that they're unaware of, they'll pick them up, plug them in. But yeah, there is a growing trend within the spear phishing and social engineered emails whereby malicious actors derive an employee's personal email account details via LinkedIn or Facebook or just some good Googling, and use that personal email account to try and phish their corporate email credentials. So that email is going to have something like, hey Joe, this is Office 365. We've emailed your personal email account because it's listed as a recovery email, as a compromise has been detected on your accounts, etc., etc. Please click here to reset your password, surrendering their credentials, thus completely bypassing any of these corporate security measures, that we've actually put in place. And it is really important actually to understand that many become targeted using social media reconnaissance, like I've talked about. Again, with our new sort of working world at home, people are on socials more, they're on personal email accounts more, and they're much more at risk of falling victim. But LinkedIn, for example, on this sort of slide here, it's got tools to allow you to communicate. You don't need to be publishing your phone number or your email account or anything like that on any platform online. And you shouldn't be. So you do need to think, have you surveyed your staff's social media exposure? Have you surveyed your company's social media exposure to see where you've got these contact points actually publicly posted? It's also often hear stories about people filling out silly social media questions. There's quizzes you see on platforms like Facebook, like what celebrity you most like, or what's your pornography name, things like that. And they ask these questions of things like, what was the first street you were born in and the name of your first pet? And, that's your porn name. But people don't realize that those are actually recovery questions for passwords for these platforms. And people are harvesting your recovery questions in order to break into your accounts using that. So again, people need to be educated to never fill out this sort of stuff. And you do need to consider how, I suppose, confident your staff or your students are in identifying a really well-crafted phishing email, or understand how that data they're entering online can actually be used maliciously. Because a huge part of that protection picture is the education of employees to recognize attacks, recognize when their data has been harvested, and to build security awareness. Because for the malicious actors doing that, it really doesn't require sophistication, it just requires a bit of perspective and a bit of effort. And we need to make sure, I like to say that IT security needs to be a culture and not just an afterthought. Now, let's consider just quickly what a security awareness program should actually look like. Understanding in that today's landscape, it is a continuous pursuit. Training should be a constant. We can't really just arrive at secure. You need to keep that ongoing, chase to that point. So if we look at testing in this environment, now this exposes employees to a variety of attack types, and it promotes the proper detection and handling techniques if they're faced with them, like mentioned before in the question, if one of these emails does get through. Now, this testing should be delivered as well via multiple mediums, not just email, but things such as smishing, which is SMS phishing, really common here in Australia. Things like parcel tracking SMSs from Ozpost or DHL. Then the analysis of those results. Now, this creates risk-driven approaches to that training by utilizing the, insights and dashboards from the reports to target your testing and your training efforts in the right way. And then lastly, the training there. So training employees or training students how to identify and prevent security threats. That continuous training reinforces those security best practices they're actually going to need in their day-to-day lives or their learning to help protect you. And that training as well really should be delivered in the way that it's actually easily absorbed. Things like a short, colorful, animated video with or without a quiz if you want. Something that's engaging though. It's designed for an adult learner or designed for a student even. Now, if we uncover a risk in one of our employees, if you went and got them to sit through a 40-minute training video because they clicked on a link in an email, it's going to feel like a punishment instead of, I suppose, what we want, which is the promotion of good behaviors. So, we really should try and make those short, make them sweet. So the key here, education really is the key there to stopping those attacks that do get through or we can't get in front of. Again, be it SMS phishing or an attack at a personal account we can't protect, or those ones that really are so well crafted that we can't really stop them. They're exploiting other people's valid set up accounts. So we've really got to work to build awareness around cybersecurity, but more importantly, keep that training ongoing. Knowledge really does sort of fade over time, particularly in this sort of this field, if it's not been applied. And it's been said by many people that it really only takes one person to forget or become complacent to be the cause of a breach. We've also seen again with the shift to remote working, the change in environment and that sort of stuff, that what once was good security habits seem to also be fading quicker. So we'll sort of wrap up there. I mean, a total email protection suite or a stack and all those layers really should cover off all of the defenses and all the protection that I've sort of gone through today. Again now, so if we've got any questions before we finish, I'd love to answer them. I'm happy to stick around and answer whatever you want. My details are on screen if you want to reach out directly with any questions, or perhaps if you want to line up a demo of any of the products with Dean and myself. And while we're waiting as well, there's a URL to access our email threat scanner, and that actually provides you with a free scan of Office 365 using our Sentinel product, using that AI, that learning engine. If you're curious to look at some of the threats that might actually be getting through inside into your Microsoft 365 environment, head to that URL. It'll give you a free scan. Dean, have we got any more questions or anything that's popped through?
We've got a couple come through. I'll just try to consolidate a couple of these. They seem similar, so I'll just consolidate them down. We've got a question around your cloud to cloud backup. So how much data does it allow, and how long does it keep the data for?
Yeah, sure. So it's completely unlimited. Both the cloud backup and the archiving platforms have absolutely no data limits on them. They're unlimited storage, unlimited transfer, and by default, all retention periods are turned off. So we keep all data you put in our cloud backup product or the cloud archiving product for as long as you are paying for the service. We will not delete it by default. That said, though, there's heaps of options there to define granular retention policies. So if your industry does require you to delete after 7 years or 10 years, it's easy to define policies to do that. By default, they're all off. You can store as much as you possibly want.
Do you have any recent examples locally that you might not be able to share on the screen, but just in general that you've been exposed to that you're seeing are quite common now with the current situation?
Oh, yeah. Look, I mean, the main ones, there's some I'd love to share with you. I got sent through yesterday, actually. But the main ones still are Office 365. The ones that are phishing, I suppose the way to look at it is there's so many people out there who are so unaware of how malicious people are being with email, that the ones that are becoming really successful locally, is sort of, as I touched on, is those Office 365 impersonation ones. There are heaps going around. For some reason, a lot of people locally are very, very aware of the AusPost fraud ones. So it's very rare I actually see someone falling victim to one of the AusPost phishing emails. But the Office 365 ones seem to hold more, more like they're actually valid or something like that. But that's generally the ones we're seeing being successful locally are the Office 365 ones. And then there is obviously the point where people are not actually surrendering credentials, but instead they're just being brute forced or their accounts are being guessed. That's still occurring from people deploying or using weak passwords. And then there's obviously things like multi-factor authentication, which really should be deployed to help stop a lot of this. But unfortunately, it is quite difficult, particularly where we look at schools and educational institutions, to put multi-factor authentication across the students. It's quite hard to do. So we are seeing a lot of places where weak passwords are still getting compromised.
I know for me, I see 2-3 times a week at least emails that are coming from legitimate sources that, for the most part, look quite legitimate, with a link in them and some sort of a call to action that the sender of the email they don't even realize they've sent the email. And I think it's only because we're quite fortunate that we live and operate in that space that we pick it up, because I could see how easy it would be for most people to, I shouldn't say fall for it, but it's such an indirect attack that they seem to be using now, and it's very prevalent. Where someone would, I think you called it lateral phishing, if I've got the term right, where someone bumps into somebody else's account, puts in a whole bunch of magic so that you can't tell that someone else is using your email account, and then launches from a legitimate email address using your legitimate email signature to then harvest information. Yeah,
exactly. And one thing I didn't touch on, one of the components inside Sentinel, that product, the API-based inbox defense, actually does the detection of that. We do the detection of account takeover. We look at suspicious sign-ins. We look at suspicious inbox rules, and we alert based on the fact that lateral phishing may have been sent out to let you know if we've suspected that there's an account takeover that has actually occurred. It's another one of the, I suppose, the components that sit in that suite as well.
You mentioned earlier forensics.
Yeah, so there's a forensics and incident response tool. It's part of that email protection stack I showed you. What that actually allows you to do is investigate incidents inside your environment inside 365. And not only can you go and perhaps if, I suppose, either someone reports a phishing email to you or they report that, hey, I've received this or I've accidentally clicked on this, you can use those tools to search your entire 365 tenant for those emails. You can look at any related emails, you can find all the instances and delete them out of all the mailboxes. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a security threat as such or a breach. We can also do that with those tools from just a general perspective. Perhaps if a business or finance manager has sent out pay slips to the entire organization and they shouldn't have, or someone, perhaps a student, sent out an abusive email to half the faculty they really shouldn't have, we can go in there, search for that email in every single mailbox, and a few clicks, delete it out of every mailbox in the environment. So there's tools that allow you to recover from those sorts of incidents if they do happen to occur. Now, those forensics tools also include what we call post-delivery remediation. So if we get a mail that comes through that at the time of scan or time of entry, we don't deem it a threat, but down the track, we do determine that that is now a threat. It's being a confirmed threat for whatever the reason is, the URL or the content or what have you. We'll then alert you and say, hey, we've detected this email sitting in your inbox. We've now decided and confirmed that is actually a threat. And we'll also look at related threats to that as well. So perhaps it we determine that a threat in somebody else's environment because of this URL. We'll go, yep, now this URL is also related to the other threat we've seen. We want to remediate those. So we can do that based on manual remediation, or we can set it up to do it automatically. As soon as we detect that there's a post-delivery threat sitting in your mailboxes, we'll go and remediate that and move it out as well.
You also mentioned DMARC. What is DMARC and why is DMARC important?
Yeah, so there's a few what we call sender authentication mechanisms with email. These are DMARC, DKIM, SPF, and pointer records. And some of the key ways that we use from a gateway perspective to block or determine if an email is illegitimate. Now, DMARC in itself cannot, I suppose, isn't that useful, but there's a lot of information the DMARC standard gives us to tell us what's going on inside our environment. And the way that works is once we've configured in your environment, if someone out there in the world receives an email from your organization, the people who've received it report back to us and go, hey, we've received an email coming from your email domain. We've allowed it into our environment because it passed SPF or it passed DKIM. Or in the instance, they can say, hey, we've received this email coming from your email domain, but we've not let it in because it doesn't align with your SPF or your DMARC records. So we can both see people receiving your emails that are illegitimate or legitimate, or perhaps you're using a service like Xero or something like that, and you've forgotten to update SPF records, and perhaps people who should be receiving your emails aren't receiving them because they're getting rejected for spam markers. We can see that occurring. So you've got ways using that DMARC standard to actually remediate and fix both legitimate and illegitimate emails, depending on whether or not they're actually being accepted by the receiving organizations.
Right. So if you don't have those standards in place in your email environment, you could be accidentally letting in emails that are malicious because you're not performing the variety of checks required.
Yeah, exactly. But more importantly, where we look at something like DMARC, particularly if you've got a fairly public or a public-facing brand that someone might want to abuse, you may not be aware that people are out there using your brand name and trying to impersonate you and your domain because you don't know or can't see that occurring. Whereas DMARC allows you visibility into that actually going on.
Okay, great. We're a little bit, about 5 minutes over, but hopefully I sent a public chat out. Hopefully you've all seen it. Just in case you're not aware, there is a site out there. It's called Have I Been Pwned? If you'd want to check as well, just to see or validate what Thomas has shared here around how frequently your email addresses can be compromised with quite public and reputable sources. Feel free to pump your email address, be it work or personal or a few of them, into that particular site. Obviously, no need to click through on any of the advertising that goes with it, but this system does track where public-facing applications or providers have had their email addresses or have had breaches, and and they'll legitimately advise whether your email address has been compromised. And I think you might be surprised, just at least, because it's one thing to hear that this goes on, but it's another thing to actually feel that you're impacted. And particularly when it's such a silent thing that goes on in the background, where these cyber criminals are they are unethical. They don't care if they hurt you, and they are very intelligent about how they approach, for want of a better term, getting paid. At the end of the day, they'll play a game of chess to make sure they get paid, and their objective is to make sure that they can do it without getting caught. And if that means that they can leverage your mailbox to do it, they'll do it. So yeah, feel free to check that out. Hopefully, I don't know, Thomas, if you've got any other useful sites that you think the people out there in the audience might value having a bit of a look at. Obviously, I'd suggest having a look at the scan.barracudanetworks.com offer as well. Great opportunity to have a scan of your 365 tenancy, and it'll show up whether you've got any compromises or such.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll show you stuff that's actually got through whatever your current filtering is. So perhaps you're using 365 and you're just using the default stuff. Even if you're using another email vendor at the moment or security vendor to protect you, you can use that scan and it won't cause any impact or do anything to the environment or any other systems you've got running. But where we do a scan and we can see that there's phishing, there's blackmail, there's service impersonation emails in there already, we'll give you a report of all of those. And the intention there is that if we can see those and give you a report of what's already got through and is sitting in your mailboxes, consider the fact that we could actually block all of that in real time if need be, if you wanted to activate the Sentinel product inside your environment.
That's awesome. All right, well, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for everyone who's attended. And Thomas, greatly appreciate your time today. Please do keep safe and healthy, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.